All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're taking our look at Florida State football and what a disaster class it has been for them in 2024, kind of analyzing what has went wrong and what the future may look like, which is incredibly gloomy right now. And, starting with preseason expectations, a lot of people had FSU as the ACC champions and a college football playoff lock. Me personally, I didn't feel that way. I still had them at 9-3 because I thought they would be good enough to at least beat some of these teams that they've lost to. But I didn't think this would be a very good football team one bit. Obviously last year they had a lot of success in the portal, and that's why this offense was very good. But coming into this year, they did not do very good in the portal. I didn't think DJ Uyunglele was a great addition to replace a guy like Jordan Travis. In his 5 games, less than 1,100 yards, 4 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He's played incredibly poor. They went out and got Malik Benson and Roydale Williams from Alabama to be their number ones at wide receiver and running back, respectively. I just didn't think these were the correct moves to be able to, compete as a playoff team, Nick. And you can see now this offense, even with the veteran offensive line they had, that I thought would generate, enough push to be able to have some balance. 58 yards per game rushing, less than 15 points per game. The only game they had over 100 yards was against Cal in the lone victory they have this season. And again, I thought this team would be bad, but I didn't think they would be this bad, which is now sitting at a 1-5 record. You lost in Dublin to Georgia Tech, double figures at home to Boston College, lost by 8 to Memphis, and then you just lost by double figures to Clemson at home as well. Wow, Nick, this is just stunning, right? For these numbers I just read off, they are incredibly poor. And even with some of the positive attributes they had, like the offensive line and, the defensive line, and, some of the guys in the secondary, a few players at linebacker, they've been no good in any spot. I said that in week 3. I don't think they're good at anything, and they aren't. This is not a good football team one bit. I can't say I'm not shocked because I said this team would not be good, but to be this flat-out awful, bottom of the FBS after a playoff run, this is just awful.
It's quite frankly stunning how bad this team is this year at 1-5 in the middle of October. It blows my mind. You really thought this team would be 5-1 at this point in the season, with the one loss probably coming to Clemson as what was a big matchup, or maybe at SMU on the road could have been the one loss you predicted in the preseason. But 1-5 is an absolute all-out disaster. This has been a really bad season, and it hasn't worked. I thought Florida State would make the playoff as an at-large team. I thought they would get the job done. In the end, I figured Clemson would win the conference. But boy, was I wrong, and this was a complete disaster. And you started to see issues early on in Dublin against Georgia Tech, where they looked shaky. They were having a lot of drives where it looked like DJ wasn't comfortable. Outside of the single drive in the fourth quarter where he marched them down the field to get some points on the board, they looked shaky, they looked uncomfortable, and he looked shaky and he looked uncomfortable. Even if you had lost to Georgia Tech, you could have said, okay, it's week 0, you're playing in a foreign country, a tough start to the season. You still have a lot to play in front of you. There still would be opportunities to make it in the playoff, even if you did lose one more game in the season, potentially to Clemson or Miami, someone like that, or Notre Dame. There was still a chance that you could be a playoff contending team despite the loss of Georgia Tech, who is a respectable team. But then to go out and get absolutely gut punched over and over again by Boston College at home before losing to Memphis at home, that just put the nail in the coffin and absolutely buried what is a forgetful and terrible season. The whole offseason rhetoric was buried within 2 weeks, as that was just a complete nonsense talk from this team, as they have been a complete disaster on all sides of the ball. That Boston College game that I was referring there, BC ran all over Florida State, and Florida State couldn't do a damn thing about it. They absolutely just ran over them over and over again. Their former running back Trayshawn Ward had a really good game in that game. Castellanos had a really good game. Robichuk was running all over them, absolutely dominated on the ground, and that was just the sign of things to come for this Florida State team. It's been an unmitigated disaster, and it's not getting any better. The schedule is not getting any easier as we go on into October and November, and this could be a very bad season to forget for Noles fans.
And I said it the entire time because a lot of mainstream media was just locking this team to be the CFP nominee. And I was like, well, Clemson's mine. And I felt that nobody really did any research on this team. For the starting lineup they had at the skilled positions, I thought it was just nonsense for them to assume FSU would be there. I did not think they would be good at all. I think that certainly speaks to what Mike Norvell, people like to call him, a portal warrior, I guess. And he didn't do very good this year. And I felt that way from the start. I had FSU fans try and tell me that their supporting cast was one of the better ones in the country. And I'm just like, I don't know where you're getting this from. I don't think they're that good at all. And that certainly has been led to this big demise. At the same time, DJ, who looks like he might be out for the year now with, hand injury. He's not been accurate, has not helped this ball team at all. I thought this supporting cast would be good enough with a higher tier quarterback to still win games and be competitive in this conference. They haven't been competitive at all. I mean, they look like a JUCO team, quite frankly, out here, Nick. And how much blame do you think Mike Norvell should get for this? Because even with the offense being bad, this defense is still giving up 400 plus yards in 3 straight games. And even in the games they didn't give up 400 in, they still got ran all over. I mean, a lot of people said this would be one of the best defensive lines in the country. I felt like they would regress because last year against the run, with like 3 guys who got drafted fairly high, and then another one in Patrick Payton, they still weren't all that great against some of the better rushing attacks. So I thought they were in for a pretty big, decline. But we saw this, like you said, a gut punch. To be 182 yards per game allowed, and the number is probably even higher when you look at their losses, where they've given up 190 plus in 4 different games. It's staggering across the board because the trenches are supposed to be a strong suit, and that can help offset a team that is maybe lacking at those skilled positions. They've not helped one bit. So what do you think of Mike Norvell in this coaching job, where he just seems lost?
Giving up 4.4 yards per carry. That is a bad number. You're getting into a bad category when you're above 4 yards per carry given up on the ground, giving up 219 pass yards per game as well. Just bad numbers. Mike Norvell, I think a lot has to be said about him in this situation. I think a lot of this, the pain that comes with this, lays on him. Again, the media talked about him all offseason. He made noise all offseason. He got that huge extension, and they've come out and absolutely looked a shell of themselves. And I think a lot of that does start with the fact that they benched a lot of players opted out, not benched the wrong word, opted out and didn't play in the bowl game shellacking that they got from Georgia last year. I think that sets a bad tone for your team heading to this season, and being at 1-5 at the end of October, I think sort of makes that point a little bit more clear for me. Norvell, it looked like he had turned things around, right? 10-3 and then 13-1 last year. Looked like things were trending in the right direction, but this is a massive step back for this team, and you kind of got a question about whether or not the portal is reliable. You can have hits with it, but you can have a lot of misses too. They rolled the dice on the portal again this year to replace a lot of key players that left. Benson, Jalen Brown, Roydell Williams, DJ. All of them have not panned out at all for this offense. Benson has not been anywhere near what they had hoped of him. He has no touchdowns so far this season, just been very weak. Jalen Brown has not really been anything nice at all for this team. 8 grabs for under 100 yards. Poor from him. Roydell Williams has 54 rushing yards on the season, and DJ, who's now hurt, has been just an absolute unmitigated disaster with 4 passing touchdowns and 6 interceptions, a 53% comp rate, and Brock Glenn does not look any better plugging into that offense. I think you got to look at this from a sustainability aspect. Going after the portal and just grabbing key pieces for your offense out of the portal and trying to plug them in is not going to work when you play in a tough conference. I think that's completely proven here, and I don't think Mike Norvell's on the hot seat necessarily, but you got to start asking him questions at this moment in time, because if this falls off any worse than it already is, they could lose to Duke this upcoming weekend. That's a pretty damn good Duke ball club. They got to play Miami, Notre Dame, Florida still. Those are all teams they could lose to. They could potentially lose to UNC as well. If they at worst only pick up one more win this year against their FCS foe later in the year in Charleston Southern, then you have to have a really long and hard conversation about the direction of this football program.
Yeah, and you look at how they were finalists for Cam Ward, and you wonder how that went down. NIL obviously played a big factor in that. Were they so confident in DJ that they went ahead and didn't make a final counter offer? Miami, of course, I thought was more desirable, but you certainly wonder what went wrong in those negotiations, why they weren't able to land him, and how different things could have potentially been, obviously, for both sides. DJ likely out for the year. And obviously, everyone's going to clown him for that. But them losing him means that they really don't have a chance to win any games, because Brock Glenn really isn't any better. He's been really forced into some tough situations, though. First start of this year came against Clemson. Then his first 2 starts last year came against Louisville and Georgia. So this guy's faced nothing but top-tier defenses so far. So we haven't had a chance to see him against a team like Duke, some mid-level competition. Maybe he can spark this offense a little bit more. But again, the problem is they just do not have much of a supporting cast, which, again, does not shock me one bit. And now they've lost DJ Lundy at linebacker for the season. So, things just continue to get worse for this team. Doesn't seem like they're going to play very hard the rest of the year, you would think. And like you said, Mike Norvell probably not on the hot seat, and I don't think he is at this moment in time either, because, they're mostly still holding on to the recruiting class they have upcoming. Doesn't seem like they've lost many guys just yet in the one they just brought in. So we'll certainly have to continue to monitor that and see how it turns out. But this has just been horrid from Florida State. We'll go ahead and look at the remaining schedule. And I went ahead and put some predictions on here as well, because why not? I don't think Duke is that good of a ball club. I know their record says one thing, but they've also played a very weak schedule. one of the weakest in the country so far. That's why they're not even close to being ranked. They do host North Carolina November 2nd. I'll go ahead and give them the nod there. And then Charleston Southern. They should beat the FCS opponent, right? And that brings you to 3 wins on the season. That's got to be the worst, 1 year, efforts you've seen where they went 13-1 last year to turn around and win 3 games this past year, Nick. And like the things I alluded to, a lot of misses in the portal. But they had enough pieces here to make a bowl game, win 8 games minimum. And instead, in the first month of the year, they hit their under-win total. So bettors were happy with that one. I should have gotten in on the action because I knew this team would not be good. But, man, 3 wins would be something awful. And that does mean that Mike Norvell in 2025 needs to produce or he will be gone fast.
If you're Mike Norvell, you need to find a way to stop the bleeding immediately. If this team goes 3-9, that is a complete and utter unmitigated disaster, and you have to find bring in new coordinators next year. Maybe you need to change up the defense and offensive coordinator. Maybe you make some sort of switch. I don't know who's going to play quarterback for this team next year. I don't think it's going to be Brock Glenn. So now, what does that mean? You got to go back out to the portal again and get a new face in there and plug somebody back in. How could that look? That seems like you're entering a bad cycle, in my opinion. If you're going to just keep hitting the portal over and over again and try to bring in, quarterbacks and running backs and wide receivers, I think you're just kind of pushing the problem further down the line, and you're lining yourself up for disappointment again next year. I don't know who's going to play quarterback for this team. I don't know who's going to be the number 1 running back for this team. I don't know who's going to be the key wide receivers or tight ends for this team. It doesn't seem like there's much of a plan here. Yes, it worked well out of the portal in 2023, but it's proving that this year that it swings and roundabouts, and it can certainly go bad very quickly if they go out there and they don't land a top quarterback, which it's possible that top quarterbacks may say, hey, I don't want to play for a team that could massively disappoint again. I don't want to play for a team that's in complete uncertainty. They were suing the conference. They had all this stuff going on, a lot of outside noise from the media, and they are just flat out disappointing again. The schedule is not easy as all you just laid out. They got to travel to South Bend. They got to travel to Miami. They got to play Duke, who are punching above their weight. They got to play Florida, who have some wind in their sails and have picked up some wins to try and keep another coach whose job may be on the hot seat up there, or certainly on the hot seat up there with Billy Napier. This is a disaster for Florida State. I don't really know exactly what's going to improve because the defense hasn't been that great this year either. I don't know exactly what the key to success is. I don't know who you bring in at quarterback. I don't know how you fix this, but this is a complete disaster. Disappointing if you're beyond disappointing if you're a Florida State fan. Downright apocalyptic and a complete nuclear fallout level disaster in Tallahassee in terms of this football team. I don't know what direction you go from here, but Mike Norvell, he's got to sit down in the offseason and have a lot of tough conversations with people in that organization, whether it's administration or other coaching staff or just players, because if they have a bad season next year, if they go I don't know, 5-7, 4-8. He's totally out of a job. No shot he's keeping his job if they have another bad season next year.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned who will be the quarterback, because I said that to myself, many weeks ago. I think even in the preseason, I can't remember when, but I was just like, who's going to be the future for this team? That's the problem with trying to just portal hunt your entire way through, an off season, is you don't develop anything. You don't have any continuity within your roster, within your program, and I think it's hard to build from within. The top programs aren't having to do that. Guys like Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, they go out and get a couple of top guys every year if they're available. If they're not, they don't care, because especially Georgia, who's barely used the portal. I know they picked up a couple of guys this past year at wide receiver and whatnot, a nice running back, but they didn't have to do that. They just did that because the opportunity was available to them, because in the past, they haven't really went after much. And, I think it's hard to sustain success when you continue to switch quarterbacks every single year pretty much. I think Preston Stone over at SMU is going to enter the portal, and I think that's a guy they're going to go out and get, a guy that pretty much lost his starting position, but has shown flashes in the past. That's an early prediction right there, Nick. I think that, I don't know if that will solve many solutions, because the supporting cast is still kind of weak. In this past recruiting class, they brought in Luke Krumnick, who is a top 40 recruit at quarterback from Savannah. So maybe that's a guy they look to, but this doesn't seem to be a lot of upside right now in this program. The recruiting class they have is 34th nationally, with NSD showing up in about 2 months. They're going to hit the portal hard again, though. Kind of a desperation move. They got to do better, though. The guys they picked up, I was not a fan of them. I didn't think they were going to do much. And well, guess what? They've done literally nothing. So that's going to be the game plan for Norvell, is try to hit the portal. Just got to get better players like you did in 23. Instead of getting DJ, you got to get the Cam Wards. Whatever it takes, it's got to happen, or Florida State's going to be right back in the same boat they were under Willie Taggart, and that's being no good at football, missing bowl games.
This is a complete and fascinating case study on building up through the high school recruiting ranks or building up through the portal. You see the dominant programs like your Alabamas, like your Georgia, like your Texas to a degree, building up through the high school ranks, particularly when you look at Georgia and Alabama, building up through the high school ranks, getting in top recruits over and over again, and letting them sit on the bench, letting them develop and figure out their way before you plug them into the offense. When you have the programs like Colorado, like Florida State, like some other programs where they're just constantly attacking the portal and trying to bring different pieces in, and it's not really working out. It's failing spectacularly for some of those programs. It is certainly an important case study of this new age of college football. I don't know what they're going to do. I think Stone's a good shout at quarterback, and I think they might go after a group of five guy, which is a complete gamble. When you're going after a group of five players to step up to your quarterback, you're completely rolling the dice, and that leads to issues. I don't know if you go for someone that fell out at a Power 4 program, you go out for someone who was overachieving at a group of five program. I don't think there's a clear path forward for Florida State in terms of getting a quarterback, and that's sort of the big thing is, right, if you have bad quarterback play, this is not going to get any better because I don't think they have enough skill position players around them to elevate bad quarterback play. They're going to need to get an elite quarterback somewhere and also get some better skill position players to kind of work and plug in with that team. I think the defense is certainly fixable. I'm not as concerned with the defense. I think the defense is just having a down year. I think you can plug in better pieces next year. Some guys will stay and return. Some guys will step up from the lower levels on the depth chart and be strong in the defense. I think the defense will be fixed next year. I think the defense will be a lot better next year. I think it'll be closer to a top 20, top 10 unit like it was in the past. The offense is where I have a lot of concerns looking forward with this team. I don't know what the vision on offense is. Maybe a new coordinator, maybe bring in a lot of wholesale changes because the offense has been bad in all fronts, and that's been the biggest issue for me this year, and I don't know if that's an easy fix. The defense I'm a little more high on. I worry about this offense long term for Mike Norvell and company.
And before I wrap this up, I do want to again kind of bash mainstream media because everyone thought this team would be great, and it just seems like they didn't do very much research. Even Nick Saban had them in the CFP. I think everybody on Game Day pretty much did. So, am I being a little bit too harsh, Nick, or do you think the writing was certainly on the wall, even though you didn't agree with the prediction I had in the fullest of sense? You even said you didn't think the team would be that great. Still had them in the CFP, though, and that ended quickly. Do you think I'm being too harsh, or do you think a lot of guys just didn't seem to put much effort into analyzing this football team?
Well, I think you're being slightly too harsh. As you said there, I think I kind of lined up in the middle there where I had this team in the playoff, but I didn't have them winning the ACC. I thought they would fight and find a way in, but I figured it would be a tougher road than most people alluded to. I thought there were some positives with this team. I thought the defense would be strong still and be able to help kind of counteract what could have been a weak offense. I thought Roydell Williams would have a better season. I thought Benson might, be okay. I thought DJ might be playing at levels that were good enough to drag this team into the playoff. I didn't think it was going to be easy like a lot of people did, but I also didn't think they'd miss the playoff. I was wrong. They're going to certainly miss the playoff, and it's an embarrassing miss. I think the media overestimated this team. A lot of it is, of course, because of the discussions last year. But again, I was feeling a little, uneasy about this team after the blowout loss to Georgia. I thought that was setting a bad example and setting a bad precedent going forward. And that clearly is the case because this has not gotten any better since they got completely trounced by Georgia in the Orange Bowl, which I never liked. You can't give up on your team. You can't just give up and throw in the towel because, hey, we got left out of the playoff for a team that deserved to be in there. I'm just going to wave the white flag and not care anymore. I thought that was a terrible example for this team, and it's obviously proven itself as they looked a shell of themselves this year. I think it was certainly a case where you could have made the case to me that they were missed the playoffs. You could have made the case to me that they were going to make the playoffs and win the conference. I felt like they were somewhere in the middle, and I was wrong, and the media was wrong, and this team was a complete disaster, missed the playoffs. It's tough. It certainly is embarrassing if you're a Florida State fan, and I think that this is sort of an example of why you can't put too much stock into what happened the year prior when you have college football in this day and age where so many players leave programs, so many players transfer, so many players are one and done at their certain programs. You can't put too much stock into what happened last year. You got to focus on what's on the roster this year, and when it's a completely new roster and revolving door, you can't just expect them to go out and absolutely trounce people. There are going to be some growing pains. There are going to be some issues to this level. For most programs, probably not, but you got to take some teams a step back next year when you're looking at their playoff predictions. Teams that achieve high expectations in 2024 but don't return a lot, you got to start bumping those teams down and just not expect portal plugs to be the ones that continue to carry on strong finishes from teams because they're going to naturally regress. I think we have to understand that the portal plugging in a like for like doesn't always mean results are going to be the same.
As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me. Last thing I'll say is they do have opportunities here to play at Miami, at Notre Dame. They can, ruin those teams' seasons, and then they host Florida at the end of the year. They can get Billy Napier out of a job. So I mean, there's still a lot on the table here for them to accomplish. The opportunities are there in front of them. So I don't think this team should give up. I just think they should continue to keep fighting, and I hope that they can do so. Right now, they're not showing much fight. But again, Nick, those opportunities are there, and they would be major in college football if they can win any of those 3 games.
Certainly opportunities are there, and there's opportunities next year. This team has to be focused in 2025, looking ahead. I think a lot of Florida State fans looking ahead, but they host Alabama next year. They travel to the Swamp. They travel to Clemson next year. They host Miami. So there's a lot of big opportunities next year coming up as well that, looking far in advance there, but I think that's something you have to keep in mind with this team. If they can go out and shock Miami, Notre Dame, or Florida, I think that's a really good way to build momentum. If they can get a couple of wins here and get themselves closer to 500, that could mean a lot. If they just roll out and die and only win one more game against their FCS team, I think it'll continue to show that there is no progress being made in Tallahassee.
Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.